America's pastime is, was, and always will be shooting.
Hello everyone, Finn and Flask here. So today we're going to talk about powder, and I'm going to give you some insight on the differences between the powders. There's a lot of different powders out there, and you get your real black powder, and then you have your black powder substitutes. For black powder substitutes, you have things like Pyrodex, Jim Shockey's, 777, and then you have black powder, which is generally GoX. They've been having some issues lately, and I think they're actually starting to come back into production. But then you have Schutzen, and you have Swiss. There might be a couple other brands out there too, but those are the big dogs in the black powder market. So before we get into the nitty gritty of the powders for muzzle loading, the first rule is never use smokeless powder. Period. End of story. Because your gun will explode. So no smokeless powder. Period. Before we get into the meat of the video, if you wish to support the channel, you should check out my eBay store where I sell muzzle loading accessories. It'll be linked in the description. So you may be wondering, what do you want? Do you want real black powder like GoX? Or do you want a substitute like Pyrodex? If you're shooting flintlocks, you're pretty much locked into black powder because the flash point on Pyrodex isn't as high as it is with black powder. So if you're shooting cap locks, you can do Pyrodex. If you're shooting flintlocks, you really should do real black powder. I have heard of people using 777 in flintlocks and have good results with it, but I stay away from that because I think you're at risk of sticking a ball down the barrel and not being able to get it out. So basically, you have things like 1F, which is cannon powder. You have 2F, 3F, and 4F. 2F is like rifle powder. You're saying 50 cal and over, shotgun, stuff like that. 3F is 50 cal and under. And 4F is generally priming powder. Okay, you have things that are also a little bit in the exception in the black powder range. You have things like 1.5F, which is something that Swiss makes, which is probably more similar to like actual 18th century powder, because it's a little bit bigger than what we would standardly say is 2F, but not quite as big as 1F, which is cannon powder. Okay, then you also have things like Null B, 0B, which is made by Swiss, which is an exceptionally fine priming powder. And I think some other companies, I think Swiss actually makes like a 5F, a 6F, and a 7F. I think I've seen those somewhere, but I've never actually seen it in person. I think I've only seen it advertised. And then with Pyrodex, you have the rifle, which is like a 2F equivalent, and you have Pyrodex P, which is like a 3F equivalent. So I'm going to get up close and I'm going to show you some of the differences between these powders. You can see the 2F is marked FFG. You come down, you can get a good idea on how, you can see how robust those granules are. And this is for bigger bore stuff. Then you have FFFG. And you can see it's quite a bit finer. That's for sub 50 cal stuff. Some people use 3F all the way around. They'll use it in their priming pan. They'll use it in larger bores and stuff like that. But you get a little more pressure, so you have to use less 3F. And here's 4F. You can see it's exceptionally fine. Some people actually use these in like 31 caliber cap and ball revolvers because they get a little more velocity out of it. But generally speaking, the 4F is specifically for priming. If you're wondering if you actually need 4F for priming, you probably don't. Because yesterday I started off shooting at a woods walk with 4F in the pan, and it was so muggy, it was causing a real delay. And I went to 2F in the pan, and it worked just fine. So sometimes when it's really moist out, you're better off going up with a bigger granulation so it doesn't absorb as much water. You got Pyrodex rifle. You can see it's a little on the robust side, but it's not quite as big as the real black powder 2F. Okay. Then you have Pyrodex P. and that's a bit finer. And then I have some Gym Shockies here as well. I was just given some of the stuff and I haven't actually shot it yet, but it seems a little big to me as well. Generally speaking, when it comes to muzzle loading, in general, I totally suggest getting real black powder. I think it's much better because it may look dirtier when you clean it because it just comes out jet black when you're cleaning it, and the Pyrex and stuff doesn't really come out as dark, but it's much stickier and I find it to be much more corrosive. I went out and I shot the Pyrex P in one of my revolvers, and it took me like, I don't know, like 3 or 4 days before I got around to actually cleaning it. I know you're not supposed to do that, but sometimes that kind of stuff happens. And it just stripped the bluing right off. All over the outside of the revolver, wherever the flash hit, it was just down to bare metal and rusting, like within 3 days. With black powder, that doesn't seem to happen because I've gone that far with doing black powder. And also, when you're done cleaning it, I've also found that you have to get it much, much cleaner with the Pyrex stuff, because if any of that residue is on there, it will just rust out and corrode. And from what I understand, basically, black powder is not actually corrosive, even though it acts as a corrosive agent, because basically it'll absorb water and make water sit on things. The chemical itself is not corrosive, from what I understand. But I may be wrong on that. But when you clean with the black powder, it's really kind of nasty and stuff like that. But if there's a little left on there, it's not going to just corrode everything. Because once you hit it with water, that stuff is neutralized. And it's just not going to do anything, in my opinion. So I also should mention that, I also mentioned 777. 777 is another thing that's pretty common. I think a lot of people use it in revolvers because you get, I think it's like 20% more power out of 777. It might even be more than 20%. So some people like to have that extra oomph behind their loads, and that kind of makes sense. But I think it's also on the corrosive end. I know many places don't actually have black powder, so that's one of the main reasons why I'm bringing in the substitutes, because that's most likely when you're starting what you're going to end up finding, because pretty much every gun shop has Pyrex in there. But let's talk a little more about some of the rules with the black powder. Okay, so I was kind of leading you to this before, where I said basically 50 caliber and above you want to use 2F. But if you have the chance to get 1.5F, which one of these days I'm planning on getting for my shotguns, got a couple shotguns here. I've even heard people using 1F in shotguns and having good results. So you want to say 50 cal and above, use 2F as a rule of thumb. But some people use 3F in everything. I went to an NSSA event the other day, and everybody's shooting 3F and 58s. They do, 58 calibers. They like having the stuff set below the cones, in the mini balls and stuff like that. They think you get a better burn out of it, and supposedly they say it's cleaner. And I don't know if I've ever actually noticed any difference in it being cleaner. When I've cleaned when I've cleaned my shotguns, I haven't noticed it being exceptionally more foul from shooting 3F, shooting 2F, I mean. But, so 3F, generally speaking, is 50 cal and under. These are just rules of thumb. And then the 4F is priming powder, and then the sub 4F stuff is priming powder in general. But like I said earlier, some people will use these, will use 4F in 31 cal cap and ball revolvers. They get a little more oomph out of it. And with the 2 Pyrexes I have here, when I first started getting into rifles, I had my out of my CVA Hawken, I was shooting Pyrex, and I still shoot Pyrex when I'm down in Texas because I don't have a good in on getting black powder in Texas. I'd much prefer to be shooting black powder, but that's what I got for now. And okay, and Yeah, the Pirate XP, which I bought when I bought my first cap and ball revolver. I bought it at the same time, so I had the stuff to use it. And after I bought this, the person who taught me how to shoot black powder, he shoots the RS, the 2F, in both his long arms and in his revolvers, and he says he has no problem with it. Yeah, the 2F, if you were just starting out and you couldn't get your hands on real black powder, I would say just get the 2F, the RS equivalent Pyrex if you can. But you never know, you might find stuff like Jim Shockey's, and there's a couple other substitutes out there besides Triple F that I don't know much about, and I'm sure they're pretty much the same way. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you appreciate my content, I'd really appreciate it if you liked, subscribed, leave a comment, share it with friends. Doing that stuff would greatly help me out. Thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.